We're back for Your Ears Only. I'm David Alpern.
I'm Eddie Robinson with this quote from the news. Authentic freedom. That was what Pope Benedict XVI called for on his visit to Cuba. But he did not meet with dissidents, criticized the U.S. embargo, and found, quote, joy that in Cuba, steps have been taken to enable the church to carry out her essential mission. Now this.
Zooby zooby zoo. Zooby zooby zoo. Zooby zooby zoo. Zooby zoo. Zooby zoo. Mon Dieu qu'ils sont doux.
Almost everything seems more sophisticated and sexy in French, but for many watching the fifth season opener of Mad Men on AMC TV last week after an 18-month hiatus, even that sultry song and dance by the new young wife of sexy star Don Draper at his surprise birthday party was not enough to revive the original magic of the 60s retro series. Critic Adam Buckman of XfinityTV.com and AdamBuckman.com found himself using a word that he never before associated with Mad Men, boring. And for Your Ears Only, he's on the line now to say why. Adam Buckman, welcome to our show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You've been a fairly firm fan of Mad Men until now. What did you think made it so appealing to audiences and award voters, besides the 60s wardrobes and a lot of smoking that is now such a vicarious pleasure for so many of us?
Well, the thing is that the 60s accoutrements, the settings and the clothing are wonderful window dressing for the show and certainly play a role in the show. But for me, traditionally, the stuff that was always better was the dramatizations, the acting, and the script writing, and the storytelling. These other elements were, secondary and should have always been secondary, because what the show was really good at was kind of putting you in a place and time without you kind of believing that they're making believe about the 1960s. That's what I always used to like about the show the most. It was right there and in the moment, and a contemporary dramatization that just happened to take place in the 1960s.
What were the most painful differences in Mad Men's fifth season debut?
The big difference for me was a kind of a gut feeling you get when you're a critic and you, unfortunately, or for better or for worse, watch and consume entertainment with a critical eye all the time. And sometimes this doesn't help you enjoy things. But when I was watching it, I was fidgety and I was a little bit restless. And I looked at my watch and I wondered how much longer is this going to go on. And then after I did those things, I thought to myself, hey, man, this is Mad Men. That never happened to me before. And it happened during the very party scene you were talking about. And the party scene, to me, just seemed to drag on. And, with little set pieces where these two people would talk to that one person, and then it would switch across the room to three other people. And then there was the Zooby Zooby Zoo performance, which became kind of a big hit, so-called, on iTunes, apparently, David. So I guess there was a lot of people who got a kick out of the novelty of the performance. But for me, it was just a showstopper in a bad way.
Well, she was pretty hot. I actually worked on Madison Avenue in the 60s at Newsweek, which combined some elements of advertising and journalism. And I missed in Mad Men a greater sense of the work these people actually do, pride and creativity, cleverness that emerged in those days. Mostly what I saw was status consciousness and ego. Was that typical of the series from the start?
No, and that's another thing. The workplace scenes were, to me, not as effective as they had been in the past either. I think I might have made a comment in the column I wrote that the sets and the furnishings looked more like displays at IKEA or a furniture store like Design Within Reach than an actual office where work is performed. The piles of paper were too neat. The inboxes had nothing spilling out of them. This kind of thing. I mean, I guess they might say, if someone from the show was talking to us, they might say, well, they had maybe just moved into the office or yada, yada, yada. But you know what? Offices are not that neat. And it didn't seem like a lot of sweat was coming off of anyone's brow as they kind of went around. And Don Draper, as usual, was leaving work early. The guy never seems to work and never has a cluttered desk. And that's suspicious to me.
Don Draper is now pretty lovesick over his new bride. Was he more interesting in his earlier unhappily married, merely misogynistic years?
Without question. And well, certainly it remains to be seen whether he'll cheat this season or not. One of the things that's different this season now with this new relationship with Megan is they work in the same office. And that takes away a key element of Mad Men, which was always this dichotomy where in the 60s, your family was up in the suburbs of Westchester, and the man could come down to the city and basically spend the day there, untethered by communications technology to anybody. And I guess one of the points of the show was this sort of situation would allow men to basically do whatever they want, and Manhattan for Don Draper was kind of this playground while his family was not in the know and they were up in the suburbs. Now this time around, he's married to somebody who reports to him in the office, and we lack now the great marriage between Don and Betty Draper. To me, was the most interesting centerpiece of the show, and they had them get divorced. So now we don't have, that image of Ken and Barbie, the beautiful woman and beautiful, handsome man, who are actually with real-life cracks in their relationship. I wish they had just kept them going as a marriage, but a marriage with tension. And that was what was really interesting for me, and now that's gone.
You're not the only critic to have found fault with this long-delayed season opener. Do folks behind a hit series like this take criticism to heart, or are they committed to their dramatic arc and tone and ratings and critics be damned?
Well, I think like it really depends on the individual. I know that if I go online and as I do, as we all do, who write online and have relatively public opinions, you go online and you are concerned or at least curious about how people are reacting to you. And sometimes when they react harshly, it can sting a little bit. But the thing about these people, and I can't really speak for them personally, for all I know, Matthew Weiner is upset when he reads a column that denigrates his show. But I think at this point in the history of Mad Men, the creators, producers, and writers of it are so probably wrapped up and taken in by the magazine covers and the plaudits and applause that they get from most critics, that they probably have this sort of omniscient belief that they are untouchable and can do no wrong. I imagine that in this particular point in the cycle of this show, they are just not even paying attention to criticism because they believe they've made the biggest success that anyone is talking about at the moment in television. So why should they listen to anybody who might identify cracks in what they're doing?
Adam Buckman of XfinityTV.com and AdamBuckman.com, where he posts a continuing blog of his 30-year career.
Quote from the news, "We need to take a leap of faith." That was one of the rants attributed by an FBI affidavit to a JetBlue captain who was subsequently locked out of the cockpit by his co-pilot and subdued by passengers, including, ironically, a contingent of security professionals.
Next, Hunger for The Hunger Games, for your ears only.